This video is a brief overview of Step 4 of the Living with Risk Decision Support approach. The Living with Risk Decision Support approach was developed as a way to broaden our approach to risk assessment and management so that we can better support our older adults to live with risk. The Living with Risk Decision Support approach is a four-step approach that supports a holistic, structured, and systematic review of an older adult's risk status. This training video provides a brief overview of Step 4, how to have a conversation about risks and ways to address concerns. As we learned in Step 1, clinicians, clients, and their caregivers may all perceive risks differently. Goals of care differ when there are safety concerns, and clinicians and clients come to the therapeutic relationship with different expertise. Clinicians as experts in illness, diseases, causes, negative consequences, and resources, and clients as experts in their life on what matters most to them and what the possible positive consequences are of risk-taking. As we all may come to the therapeutic table with different perceptions, goals, and outcomes, conversation about risks is an important step of the risk management process. This approach acts as a decision support tool as it has been shown to improve clinical thinking, decision-making, and communication between clinicians and between clinicians, older adults, and their caregivers. The clinicians in the last study indicated that the Living with Risk decision support approach improved their communication in that it helped initiate conversations, focus the conversation, clarify everyone's concerns, support conversations with diverging perspectives, provide conversations about the rationales behind the decision, and structure documentation. Some clinicians found the safety continua helpful to initiate and structure conversations between clients and their caregivers when they disagreed with each other about whether this was a high or low risk situation. Clinicians have also used the summary table to support their conversations. The older adults who were interviewed in a previous study were asked specifically about how they wanted to have conversation about risks and what information they wanted. They confirmed that all columns in the table contained pertinent information. The older adults from the previous study appreciated that the summary table provided the rationales for the concerns and for the recommendations. They also appreciated that it provided a safe space to hold differences of opinions, as it provided opportunities for the clinicians to initiate conversation that neither the older adult nor the caregiver felt comfortable initiating. The older adults also appreciated that while they may not have agreed with all the recommendations, they liked having the list of suggestions in case they changed their mind in the future. For the clinicians, having a list of suggestions of what the older adult agreed to was just as important as what the older adult declined, as it provided a discussion point about exploring what was agreeable about the recommendations, so that it helped the clinician understand motivations and preferences that could be used to make the other recommendations more appealing. For instance, in this case, what made the night light and the medication review recommendations appealing to this client? Here are some quotes from the older adults in the previous study discussing elements of the conversations that they had with clinicians about risks. These quotes highlight the older adults' preferences for positivity and for being provided with a rationale to the decisions. Yeah, it seemed to be that they were focusing too much on the negative and not enough on what can be done. I think that a positive attitude shown by the people involved, including myself, is a big benefit, and any negativity should be set aside and mentioned, but not insisted on type of thing, you know? I think that being positive about the whole situation is quite an asset. I'd really like to know the rationale for why I'm not able to do what I want to do. These quotes highlight how the older adults appreciated a cooperative and collaborative decision-making process. I thought that they handled things pretty fairly. They listened to what I had to say, and I didn't want them to boss me around, so to speak. They listened to what I had to say, and they cooperated with me, and in that respect, I was quite satisfied. Well, I think it should be a group effort in consultation with the doctor, the clinician, the caregiver, and the patient. Depending on how the patient is, they should all be consulted and share in the decision making. Well, it's my life and it's my decision, and I just wanted to make sure that they understood where I was coming from. And it really went fairly smoothly. Everybody had their input, including myself. Yeah, I think it's important that it's a cooperative endeavor, not the clinician or whatever sits there with a tick sheet. I would probably want to actually see the form and see what we're looking at and see what we're doing, not be spoken at, but sort of more with. What I like about it, it's sort of a summary of probably a number of conversations that have happened over a period of time, and perhaps a client like me wouldn't remember necessarily. So it's really helpful to have it all in one place and have it really reviewed, because I think that would help me to agree with what perhaps is being suggested because it's there. So to summarize, in order to support intentional conversations with the older adult, their caregiver, and or your team about the risk, focus on what matters most for the older adult. Support the older adult's priorities, and when there are disagreements or differences of opinions, support the discussions to understand the reasons and the rationales for these divergences. And where the older adult is capable, accept the right to their decisions. The older adults indicated that they wanted the focus to be on quality of life, which sometimes might be at the expense of safety. They also wanted to remind clinicians that while it is helpful to know where there are difficulties, they also wanted the focus to be on what can be done versus only on what can't be done. They acknowledged the importance of being involved in the decision making that impacted them, and they also wanted to be provided with the rationales for the clinician's analysis, impressions, and recommendations. Clinicians acknowledge the additional difficulty of having these conversations with people with cognitive impairment. The following recommendations have been provided from research completed in Ireland on risk communication with people living with dementia. As risk is contextual and has multiple meanings across different stakeholders and different situations, the first goal in risk communication is reaching a shared understanding rather than a shared agreement. This involves a shared understanding of the concerns, the approaches to the concerns, an understanding of the caregiver's acceptable threshold, and an understanding of the tipping points. It is important to know the person in order to provide person-centered approaches and understand the positive consequences of the older adult's decisions. In order for caregivers to support a high-risk situation, we need to acknowledge their fears and feelings and understand their beliefs. We need to ensure that both the client and caregiver are meaningfully and actively involved in the decision-making processes that focuses on solutions. Lastly, we need to acknowledge that risk assessment and risk management often occur at a time of crisis, where there may be changes in health and or functional abilities, or a change in support or accumulation of further risk factors. For these reasons, it is important to provide the older adult and their caregiver the time to process, make choices, and adapt to these changes. I would like to leave the last words to one of the older adults living alone in the community from the last study. In general, I have a lot of problems that drag me down or make me feel ill, basically, because I can't handle them. And then she'll, the clinician, will give me some sort of little tip on phoning a certain person or something, or else an answer that doesn't completely depress me. And then you feel you have the guts. That is not impossible. Then you feel like there is hope. They can solve these problems, one by one, instead of not solving them at all. So I don't give up.